David Shoemaker's new Hulk Hogan book. We talked about it on the flagship. There is widespread speculation that that it was either written or enhanced or assisted greatly by artificial intelligence. The reviews are not good, and it's not just Mike Johnson at this point. The handful of reviews that I have perused and skimmed and read have not been kind to this book. I haven't read the book myself, so I can't definitively comment, but it sure seems like the book stinks. The big question is, did AI write the book, or did Shoemaker write the book? And there's been excerpts floating around, and we talked about one such excerpt on the flagship this week, if you missed that segment. But I was thinking to myself, Shoemaker's never going to admit if AI wrote the book, right? You're never going to get that answer out of him. Who would know better whether the book was written by AI other than AI itself? So I spent the last few days using all of the popular AI clients and language models out there, all of the ones I could think of that were free to use, and asked them the same basic question regarding this book. And the question was, quote, regarding David Shoemaker's new Hulk Hogan biography, there is speculation and suspicion that he used AI to write the book. Are you able to identify certain clues that could potentially point to this? And of course, I had follow-up prompts after that based on where the discussion went with each AI. And they all went in slightly different directions, but I did collate and gather a consensus. And the consensus is not great for Shoemaker. It's not looking good. They all generally agreed that there's a high probability that there is heavy AI input at minimum with this book, and we're going to go through it step by step. So basically, there's certain clues you can look for to determine whether a piece of reporting, a piece of literature, a biography like this, if written prose leans heavily into AI. And one of those clues, the biggest clues, is what in the AI world they call factual hallucinations. This is the term they use in that world. They call them hallucinations. The hallucinations are confusion. And then what AI models will do is if they get confused, instead of stating that they're confused, they will just, what they call, hallucinate facts. And in some of the ways that they do that are timeline compression. And how that would relate to this book is the compression of two distinct eras of a career, say storylines from Hogan's WCW run and attributing them to his 80s run, right? Or mismatched personnel, confusing who Hogan wrestled in certain matches or attributing promos to the wrong person. And then the other clue of a factual hallucination would be confidently wrong trivia, stating easily falsifiable facts as an absolute truth, because if the AI lacks the precise context, they will, quote, hallucinate and give a definitive answer anyway. And it's one of the major problems with AI currently, that these AI hallucinations are quite frequent. So hold that thought on AI hallucination. Put a pin in that. We're going to get back to that. Another clue that AI did the work. Repetitive and formulaic sentence structure. And this is something that people point out all the time. We've pretty quickly gotten used to what AI sentences sound like, right? The robotic rhythm. multiple consecutive sentences that follow the same sentence structure, noun, verb, adjective, over and over and over. And it's not the natural rhythm of human speech or the way that most people write. And that red flag immediately goes up when you pick up on that robotic rhythm. And then in this case with the Hogan book, as many of these language models pointed out to me, what you're looking for too is an over-reliance on the subject's known buzzwords. Constantly forcing terms like Hulkamania or brother or kayfabe and that robotic rhythm and forcing those wrestling specific or Hogan specific buzzwords and phrases is something that AI themselves told me that AI does when they're asked to write something. Another clue I was told to look for was by the AI, the expert. They ought to know, as Bret Hart once said. Another clue I was told to look for: overused AI transitional phrases. Language models love the following specific transition words to help them move between paragraphs. So if there's an unnatural frequency of words and phrases like furthermore, moreover, it is important to remember, a testament to, in conclusion, those could also be clues. Another big one that was pointed out to me: non-committal analysis. AI is resistant to take a hard stance on something unless your prompts ask them to. They'll try to stay as neutral as possible. You'll see and read phrases like on one hand, but on the other hand, right? Because what AI will do is they'll state a fact, but then mildly walk it back or offer a soft critique. And then they'll balance it out with mild praise or generic platitudes until they get a sense or a tone of what you're asking it to do. It's all in the prompts. And then, of course, something that I think we've all kind of sniffed out when it comes to AI is just a surface level depth. If you've ever asked AI anything that you're well versed in, you know that you get surface level unless you dig deeper with the prompts. Wikipedia type summaries without anything kind of deep or digging deep or deeper analysis or original insights, because it's just combing the internet. It's just Googling for you. And then the other thing you're looking for is a lack of voice. And luckily with Shoemaker, this is his not first go-rounds with writing. We know what his prose, what his syntax sounds like, right? We kind of know his voice. If you read Myself or Rich, you know our voice. If Rich or I wrote something for this site, this very paywall, and we didn't identify who the author was, most of you would know within a paragraph or two who was doing the writing. Whereas if you're just having AI do the work for you, it removes your voice from the equation. So that's another clue to look for. So what I did is I fed some excerpts of the book to these language models. I fed them all the same excerpts, so I would get to see what kind of analysis I would get and if it would be similar. And it was shockingly similar when they analyzed the excerpts that I provided them, looking for those clues that I just laid out, that as readers, or really as these AI language models, the clues that these language models are looking for to determine whether AI was used here. So now I'll cite specific language models. I think Gemini did a great job with this one when I fed it the excerpt. and I quote, "The excerpt provided from David Shoemaker's book, Why Hulk Hogan Matters, contains a glaring textbook example of an AI factual hallucination in the highlighted section." And the glaring textbook example of an AI factual hallucination was in bold when it replied to me. So remember I told you to put a pin in that and we were going to talk about AI factual hallucinations in this book? So here is the specific clue. The highlighted sentence, quote, "He lost the WWF Championship back to Yokozuna in Japan away from the American spotlight," end quote. What Gemini told me was, quote, "This statement is," and this part's in bold, "entirely historically incorrect," which is a primary red flag for AI-generated text. So as we talked about on the flagship and speculated, Hogan, after he left the WWF, went to New Japan in 1993. Hogan had wrestled for New Japan a decade earlier. Yokozuna is a Japanese gimmick. These are things that routinely can trip up AI and force them to hallucinate when they start blending facts and filling in gaps themselves when they can't find a definitive answer. This is something I talked about on Thursday. But forget me, here it is from the source. Here's what Gemini had to say about this passage. Quote, "This error perfectly demonstrates how large language models mix separate but closely related concepts during data retrieval. Association blending. The AI knows Hogan had a historic relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling, wrestled there frequently around 1993, and once held an IWGP heavyweight title belt. The name Yokozuna is an example of name confusion because it's the highest ranked in a traditional Japanese sumo wrestling. So the hallucination, because AI's training data heavily links the word Yokozuna to Japan and Hulk Hogan in 1993 to Japan, it confidently hallucinated that the title match must have happened in Japan rather than an arena in Ohio. And this is exactly what I speculated on Thursday. Because we've all seen AI make this kind of mistake over and over and over. They fill in the blanks. And then in the next prompt, if you call them out on it, it'll go through its little search and apologize and correct itself. Shoemaker didn't do that. Now, this is funny too, what Gemini spit out. Gemini in specific spit out here, because it's also a point I made on the flagship. Quote, "A veteran wrestling historian like Shoemaker knows exactly where King of the Ring 1993 took place. The inclusion of this glaring geographical error strongly fuels suspicion that baseline narrative drafts or heavy structural editing for parts of the biography were automated by AI tools that were not properly fact-checked," end quote. Again, I even gave Shoemaker the benefit of the doubt when I broke this down. Maybe he didn't remember that the title change was in Ohio. I forget things all the time, and I think that I know my shit about pro wrestling. But something that I cannot give him benefit of the doubt for, as someone who, at least as a hardcore fan of wrestling, he should know that that title did not change in Japan and never did change in Japan. So what I suspect happened here, and what Gemini suspects happened here, and what several of the other language models suspect happened here, is he just put what the AI spit out to print and maybe didn't even fact check it for himself. Because that one should have been a gigantic red flag. And it's very easy to see why it caused a quote, AI hallucination in thinking that the title would have changed in Japan with all the Japanese ties to all of the subject matter. So then I asked the AIs, what about the heavy use of M dashes and some of the general syntax in these samples? So this is where the AI was less heavy-handed in directly accusing Shoemaker. Is it Shoemaker or Schumacher? Shoemaker, right? David Shoemaker. Of using AI to write the book. So, again, I will specifically use what Gemini told me here. Quote, the general syntax and heavy use of em dashes in this passage do provide clues, but they point in two slightly conflicting directions. They could indicate AI editing tools, such as Grammarly, overcorrected the prose, or they could simply be an exaggeration of David Shoemaker's real-world writing style. But put a pin in that. We're going to talk about that in a second. But here's the thing. Here's how the syntax and the punctuation align with general AI patterns, the em dashes, which is always everybody's first clue. So in the paragraph, in the snippet that I sent, there are 4 em dashes in the very first paragraph of the excerpt, which, gigantic red flag, right? So here's what Gemini had to say about em dashes. Quote, large language models love em dashes. AI frequently uses them as a structural crutch to inject context without having to write complex, varied sentence structures. If a human writer uses heavy-handed grammar-correcting AI tools, the software will routinely replace commas or parentheses with em dashes to, quote, improve flow, end quote. So it's possible that you get a lot of em dashes if you just straight up use AI to write your prose. It's also possible that if you run your writing through AI grammar correcting software, that it will change your punctuation to em dashes. AI loves the em dash. They love it. Now, some of the AIs were more heavy-handed, so I will present you the more liberal interpretation, which is what Gemini gave me regarding these specific em dashes. Here's what they had to say after scanning over some of Shoemaker's other work from the past. Quote, David Shoemaker has always heavily favored em dashes in his actual journalism for Grantland and The Ringer. However, in professional publishing, a copy editor normally cleans up an overabundance of them to prevent the text from looking cluttered. The fact that so many remain close together suggests either a rushed edited job. Let me try that again. No edits. The fact that so many remain close together suggests either a rushed editing job or an automated grammar tool that was blindly trusted. And of course, my landscapers show up as soon as I start to do an audio. I'm going to power through it, though. Maybe you can hear it. Maybe you can't. But they're out there. It's slightly distracting to me. So anyway, on the em dashes, some of the other language models thought that was a gigantic glaring red flag. But in the interest of fairness, I will point out that Gemini gave Shoemaker some benefit of the doubt, claiming that they found plenty of em dashes in a lot of his previous writing. So I still think that's highly suspicious. Here's an area where all of the AI seem to agree that there was a massive red flag pointing towards heavy use of AI, and that is in the, quote, robotic symmetry of the second paragraph of the excerpt. One language model said, and I quote, look closely at the opening sentence of the second paragraph, quote, in the process, Bret Hart, em dash, the company's newly chosen champion, em dash, was sidelined. His victory erased, his momentum disrupted, end quote. So this, from what I learned, is a classic example of an AI syntax pattern known as parallel tricolon. Parallel tricolon is when you group 3 parallel phrases together to sort of enhance the effect of what you're trying to say. And in the case of that Bret Hart sentence, okay, the landscapers were distracting me heavily. So I know I say no edits, but I had to slap pause. So what I was saying before I stopped was there is a classic example of parallel tricolon with that Bret Hart excerpt. the use of sidelines, erased, disrupted. It's trying to sound, the AI there is trying to sound authoritative. It's trying to make everything sound epic. And while real writers use the rule of three, that's not something, foreign to people who write professionally. It's the fact that AI relies on this. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. They work it in all the time. And then you look at the very next sentence, quote, Hogan didn't just win the title, semicolon, he overrode the plan, end quote. So now you get that sort of rhythmic pattern speaking that language models use when they're trying to sound over dramatic. It just doesn't sound human. It just doesn't sound the way that Shoemaker or anyone really writes. It just sounds very AI. And the language models agreed. So another thing that AI will do is they use very cliched vocabulary. There's a lot of words and there's a lot of phrases. As I pointed out earlier with the transition phrases, it's the same thing when it comes to descriptive phrases where AI will usually lean towards cliches. And this is something that the language models pointed out to me as well. And some of the examples are, quote, creative dissonance, change the narrative, quiet concession. The part where it says, encapsulated Hogan's late WWF problem. These were all red flags to the AI because while these phrases are fine, they're very bland, they're very cliche, and there's no very specific, gritty syntax that would be of the voice of the author. It's generic. There's very little use of insider slang in the excerpts, according to one of the language models, which you would think that someone like Shoemaker, being someone who's been writing about wrestling for years, would lean a little heavier on. So I think Gemini had a good summary. Quote, the syntax itself isn't a definitive smoking gun for AI generation on its own because a human could write this way if they were tired or mimicking standard essay prose. However, when you combine this highly structured, sanitized syntax with the massive factual hallucinations about Japan and other topics, a clear picture emerges. The book likely relied on AI-generated outlines, text blocks, or aggressive automated editing tools that smoothed out the author's unique voice while injecting false data, end quote. That was one of the stronger accusations from an AI language model itself, pointing towards the fact that AI was used to write this book, at least in some form or fashion, either through the literal words that you're reading or by running his own writing through AI grammar tools, which then completely tore apart Shoemaker's voice and syntax and writing style and spit it back out in a more digestible, bland, sanitized AI style form. Look, I don't think either one is good, right? There's no better option here. You can't be using AI to write a book. You can't be using AI to completely rewrite your words. And honestly, I think that this summary and this conclusion from Gemini is being very gracious towards Shoemaker. I think it's giving him massive benefit of the doubt because in laying out its 4 or 5 top clues to look for in identifying AI written prose, what it learned from the excerpts and what it pointed out from the excerpts, what all of these language models pointed out from the excerpts, is those 4 or 5 key clues in identifying AI writing basically served as a checklist for what's going on in this book. It's all there. It's way too overwhelming. I'm afraid Shoemaker may have worked himself into a shoot here, brother. I think AI wrote this book. And the language models, and they ought to know, they all seem to agree.